what do you think are some of the benefits of learning with stories?
Well, so after I got back from the meditation retreat, as I had kind of said before, it was like a time in my life where, you know, I had lost someone important to me. I'd lost my dad. I was living far away from home. I'm sure that you can relate to that now, that feeling of a bit homesickness. And at this time, I remember working a lot. So as, you know, having an English school and also being a teacher, you know what it's like to be a teacher, Michael. It's a lot of work. You do a lot of, you know, preparation of classes, and you just put a lot into it. So I remember at that time being alone in my flat, and as I would prepare my lessons, I would listen to a podcast called The Moth, and these are true stories. It's an American podcast, and people perform, well, they tell their true stories live on a stage. And I would listen to these stories, and it just made me feel closer to home. I can't explain it. It's the same feeling when you're listening to someone else's story, you just feel connected. So I loved hearing, you know, a North American accent and hearing these things that happened, these cultural references. And then at that time, so I would be listening to these podcasts, preparing my classes, and that's when I read this study. So that came out in 2016. It was published in Nature. And they put people listening to the Moth podcast into an MRI. And like I said before, they thought that only a small part of their brain would be active, the part of the brain that's responsible for processing language. But in fact, their whole brain was lit up like a Christmas tree, which was unexpected. And there's a lot of reasons for this. But basically, when we're listening to a story, we are mirroring what that person is experiencing. So if in the story they are afraid or stressed out, then our brain is mirroring that feeling, and we can actually produce adrenaline and feel stressed just listening. Or if that person is talking about something wonderful and good, then we could release dopamine, which is the feel-good neurotransmitter. And also, when our brains are active, when the neurons are active, it can indicate, and in this case it does indicate, that we are learning things more. So if I hear the word get in a truck, so I hear the phrasal verb, she got in the truck after the meditation retreat, and you feel excitement for the person telling the story, you feel a little bit of dopamine, a little bit of that feel-good neurotransmitter, then you are more likely to remember that word. You're more likely to remember get in the truck, because it kind of, the way I've heard it described is that your brain leaves like a Post-it note. Do you know what a Post-it note is? Like a sticky note on this word. Yeah, like a sticky note saying like, remember this. Like it kind of imprints somehow because there's emotions surrounding it. So anytime, in my case, stories, but any content that you're consuming, so Level Up English, if you're talking about really interesting things that make people feel things, make people interested, it becomes easier to remember, basically. It becomes easier to recall the words that you hear. And that's what we all want to do. We want to learn. That becomes essential for using a language, is remembering the vocabulary.
Yeah, I'm really happy you said that, because this links really nicely to something I've experienced and something I've also been speaking about on the podcast in the past, but I didn't know about any science. I just kind of found it in my own experience. And this is that things are more memorable when they're connected with a strong emotion, right? Whether that's happiness or it could be a negative one. Like embarrassment, I think, is a good one. Like I've had many embarrassing language situations in the past, and those are the ones that stick in my head. Like I remember every word I've said when I've kind of made a mistake. So, or if I'm something's really funny, that word sticks in my head. But if it's really boring and you're falling asleep, you just don't remember any vocabulary, do you? So I think that's a really good practical tip that learners can take from this. Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, anyone who's lived abroad and has learned a different language will have this experience, or not even lived abroad, but just made a mistake with a word. You remember it. I remember being here in Barcelona and going into a restaurant, And I had lived here for years. It was like 3 years, a long time. And I asked them for a fork. I asked them for a fork, which is a very basic sentence. And the lady, she couldn't understand me. And she wasn't trying to be mean, of course. She just didn't understand me. And I will never, ever forget that word from that point forward.
Right. Yeah.
Tenedor, fork. But yeah, that's why being immersed in a language makes it much easier to remember the words, because the time that we're using the language, it is very emotional because it's actually happening to us. But when we're living not in an English-speaking country and we want to learn the language, you have to keep in mind that you need to be entertained. You need to be engaged in what you're doing. If it's boring, just like you said, you won't learn it. It's impossible.
Yeah. Yeah, I get so many questions of learners asking what's the best way to learn English, the most efficient way to learn English. And I always try to, I'm sure you would agree, I always try to emphasize that having fun is the main thing. Like, even if this way is not, technically the most efficient, if this way is more fun, I imagine that's going to be the best way, because fun is good, fun is fun. And also it's going to be more beneficial for remembering things. So why would you not want to make your learning fun? So I think there's so many reasons to do that.
Exactly. I've heard, I can't remember the name of him. I think he's a linguist or an expert in education, but he says that entertainment or fun is the gatekeeper to learning.
Okay.
So something like, the first thing is that it has to be entertaining and engaging and fun to us. And then after that, we can learn it. So it can be incredible content. It can be not incredible. It can be, let's give the example of a list of phrasal verbs. 100 phrasal verbs, 1,000 phrasal verbs. Why not? Let's go crazy. I've had students ask me, hey, Bree, can I have all of the phrasal verbs that are going to be on the B2 first exam, which is a Cambridge exam? And I was like, yes, I'm sure that there is someone out there who has created a resource that is a database of all of the phrasal verbs. But there is no way that you can learn that. The average person, I mean, I'm sure there are people that have crazy memories that work in abnormal ways. But lists of vocabulary do not work because they are not interesting. And another part of this is that there is no context.
Yeah.
So you and me, we both teach in a way where we're trying to put vocabulary in context. So it's not like this conversation, we're talking about meditation and retreat and just giving a list of words. We're putting everything into the context of a story, of a conversation, so that people can remember it. And that is, in fact, a very good, if you are thinking about memorization, there are some different techniques that you can use, and none of them are get a list of 100 phrasal verbs and memorize them. All of them have to do with building context around what we're learning.
Yeah. I mean, I can definitely say that's true from my own experience as well, because I spent the first 4 years or so of my Japanese learning experience doing that, kind of just writing out words from word lists, and I kind of enjoyed it because I was so passionate about learning this, strange new language for me. And honestly, I did get fairly good at remembering these words. Like if you gave me a flashcard, what's this word? I could tell you quite easily. But then when it comes to actually using it and going into a conversation or even writing, I was just clueless. Like, I would know the words, but I wouldn't know how to use them because, as you said, there was no context. So even if you are a bit crazy like me and you do enjoy like word lists, it probably won't be that useful. I think that's really important to emphasize.
Yeah, I did the same learning verbs in Spanish. I would memorize the past tense verbs. I would have these lists and I would memorize them or try to memorize them. I even got an application on my phone, which was great. It was like gamified and you would go through and click on them and it'd give you a little like ding. And I was like, yes, I got it right.
Yeah.
But then I couldn't use it. I couldn't use the words. And in fact, the way that I ended up learning how to use the past tense in Spanish was creating a story for myself. So I told myself a story about when I moved to Spain. So I said, or when I moved to Barcelona, I was living in a flat with some roommates. And one day I went to the market. I don't remember the story now because I don't need it anymore. But I created myself like a very short, true story. And then whenever I needed to use the past tense, I would just retell myself the story. And then I was like, okay, yeah. So I use that tense when I'm talking about something that was happening for an extended period of time. And that was a way that I was able to use it. It was like a little technique that I used that then I could always have as a resource in my brain, not on my phone or in a list, in order to remember. And I really recommend for my students that they use these techniques. And there's a few different ones, but yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Amazing. Yeah. I think part of that is also making it about your own life experience, which is really nice. If making it real and actually useful for you, not just talking about some situation that you'll never be in, which is a nice bonus too.